Welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm going to share a very valuable lesson, something that we don't really pay enough attention to, but it's the fundamental building blocks of mental health. Before I get onto that, there's some updates. Really, it's just talking about how it's been starting a podcast. So we're on episode 12 now, and that's come around quite quickly. So it's been going about 3 months. But at the same time, it's both really challenging and really demoralizing and really quite a difficult thing. And I continuously think, should I even be doing this? Am I the sort of person that should even have a podcast? But on the other side of that, almost at the same time, I think, of course I am. I've got interesting stories. I've got good insights to things, and I've done some good things that people want to hear stories about, and people do listen to the show. So I do just think about keep it on going and carrying on, even though it's sometimes demotivating, I suppose is the right word, when you put an episode out and only about 7 or 8 people listen, but then the next week about 50 people tune in and it's all amazing and it's all happy. So yeah, I suppose just remembering why I decided to do the podcast is what keeps me going. And really the why of this podcast is it's an interesting one. The stories that I have are quite blocked up, and it's like they're packed away in the loft or in the attic, as you'd say in America. And they're in all these different boxes and they're packed in, they're stuffed in, they're unorganized. And if someone says to me, tell me this story or tell me a story from this place, I sometimes can't do it. I sometimes can't access that box because you have to get out the box and unpack everything and put it all in order. And that's really what I'm doing with this show, is trying to organise my mind around the 2 years on the road, or 5 years if you count the time in Australia, which I don't personally. It was just rebuilding a life after finishing hitchhiking. So moving on. Now this is one of the most important lessons I've ever learned, probably the most important lesson, and it's one of the simplest things I could ever impart to someone else. Whenever your mood is low, whenever you're feeling down, depressed, whenever you feel hopeless, whenever your mental health is spiraling, just ask yourself, have you eaten? Have you slept? And have you had enough water in the last 24 hours? Now on the road, whenever my mood was below what I wanted it to be, whenever I was starting to get depressed, whenever my demons were coming after me, whenever I was doubting myself, whenever I was thinking I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I'd always ask myself, have I had water? Have I had food? Have I had enough sleep? And the answer was always no, to at least 2 of those if I was particularly bad. If it was one of those, it wasn't that bad. I could just about get through it. But to have 2 of those unfulfilled, of course you're going to be in a bad mood. Of course you're going to be not quite right. Your body's telling you something's not right. And the only way it can do that is mentally, because you can carry on through physical stuff. So that's it, really. And there were multiple times where this was the case along the road, and the lowest points of the whole trip, they're not what you think, really. That people would perhaps say, oh, it was being really, really uncomfortable in a tent, or being really far from home, or what have you. And it wasn't the case. I've had some brilliant nights in an uncomfortable camping spot. I've had some amazing times just on my own, in the middle of nowhere, lost, and it was the best thing. It was just so much fun. And it could be fun because I had adequate water, I had good food, and I'd probably slept more than enough for the previous nights. And there was one night that stands out in Azerbaijan. I'd been walking for about 7 hours. I was in Azerbaijan, and so this was maybe midpoint through the whole trip, about towards the halfway point. I was approaching Georgia, and I got to this massive field and I was just walking and walking and walking. I'd run out of food apart from one little pack of noodles, and I thought that should be enough for me. No, it will be enough. It will be enough for me for tonight. And tomorrow I'll deal with that. I'll find food and whatever. And I had enough water. That was fine. And sleep was okay. And I was walking along this road and I found this big field and I thought, this is good enough. You know, there was this big, vast open space, very, very short grass for some reason. I think it was perhaps farmland. Maybe I shouldn't have been camping on there. But I did, and put my little tent up. It wasn't a tent at the time that I had. It was just a tarp with a walking pole and 4 pegs, because that took up a lot less space in the backpack than an actual tent. So I put that up and started boiling the water for the noodles. And I was so hungry, I was so low on blood sugar that my hands had started shaking. And so noodles were almost done, very, very hungry. And I just went to pick it up and I knocked it over. And it went all into the grass, the noodle juice, the water. The noodles were just pretty much inedible. They were just dirty and covered in whatever brown stuff was in the field, mostly mud. And I had no food left. And I was so ready for it and I actually needed it. And my mood just plummeted. It went from about a 6 out of 10 to a 2 out of 10. I just got a mixture of angry. I never really get angry, but I got very angry, very frustrated. And I felt like crying at the same time as screaming. And it was more, it's hard to explain. It was more internally that the crisis happened. I just felt inside that there was no point anymore. I wasn't suicidal, but I just thought, what is the effing point? Why am I even doing this? This is stupid. And the whole concept of a hitchhiking trip just came tumbling down around me, and it was all over a pack of noodles. But what it really was I hadn't had enough food. And I was tired, I'd slept enough, but I was tired. I was not rested well, but I had enough water, so I thought I can get by. But then got into my sleeping bag and I felt so empty, so physically empty. I just had to go and find food somewhere. And it was in the middle of nowhere, but I thought I've just got to find somewhere. I'll carry on walking through the night if I have to. I'm already really hungry and exhausted. Like, how much worse can it get, So packed up, started walking, just picked a direction, and after about half an hour I found some houses and I thought, well, worst case scenario, I can just knock on their door and I've got some cash, maybe I could just offer them some money for some food, and chances are, it's quite far away from Europe, it's more into Central Asia. They'll probably just take me in and say, have some food, and it's fine by us, stay the night. That's probably the most likely case. But because I was so low on mood, I couldn't really face talking to people. It sounds really odd if you've never experienced that, but I just thought, no, I can't face people right now. I might not break down, but I was barely holding myself together. I just didn't have space for that much social contact. Anyway, just followed the road. It was getting a bit busier, more houses and stuff, more cars coming in, and I thought, oh, this is a bit more promising. But there was still only 2 or 3 houses and then emptiness for a bit. Anyway, passed a few more houses and then there was a massive supermarket for some reason, and absolutely hit the jackpot. So I walked in and I think I bought about a whole shopping bag full of sweets and sugary stuff and chocolate, because my blood sugar had gone so low and my calories had gone so low for that day. I almost couldn't control myself. It was like being in a bit of a trance. So filled up with that, filled up with noodles, filled up with I think pack of ham, cheese, basically like fats and proteins, what you need, that kind of thing. So that was all fine, and ate it on the way back, and then got back to the tent tarp thing and boiled my pack of noodles, and everything was absolutely fine again now that I'd eaten. And that night I slept really, really well, and that was it. And so my mood had completely changed based on what I'd eaten. And there's been multiple times recently in life where I've woken up and the sleep hasn't been that good recently, partly because Emma's just in such discomfort overnight, being heavily pregnant, that it wakes me up too. And there's other nights where neither of us really get any sleep, and the whole next day it's odd. You don't feel I don't feel like I'm as motivated to start with, and I'm not as able to face challenges as I am normally, and I can't organise my thoughts as well, and I don't see myself as the sort of person that should have a podcast, because my self-value, my self-worth goes right down on those days. And I start to think, what's the point in trying these things? Why not just not do anything, and that sort of thing? And it's really odd, because then that night, the following night, I'll get a really good night's sleep and everything will be fine again. And I'll be back to myself. And nothing's changed in my situation apart from a good night's sleep. And they say it's amazing what a good night's sleep can do. And it really is. So I'll tell a couple more stories because they're quite fun. So the Chinese visa, there's a previous episode about that. Basically, I couldn't get a visa to get into China because I was not in my country of residence. And I found this out shortly after leaving the UK. I was about a month in. I'd made it all the way to the other side of Europe, as we'd call it, right before getting into Russia. And I was in Latvia, and I was walking out of this town, and I'd been making a lot of distance the last few days, and so sleep and food hadn't been that much of a priority. And I didn't really know these things were this important at the time. So got my phone out, checked my emails. The email came in, you've been denied the visa, essentially. It basically said you need to come back for an interview, but I couldn't do that because I was already on the road, and I didn't want to leave the bubble of the adventure. I was already growing so much as a person and seeing things, and I was away from home, and I just didn't want to go back. So that was it as far as I was concerned. I'd failed the trip. I found a way to get the visa eventually, but that's another story. Anyway, at the time I didn't really know what to do. I was walking, but I thought, what's the point in carrying on walking if I've already failed? Why would I bother? But I didn't know what else to do, so I carried on moving. And really, that's the best thing I could have done at the time, so I'm glad I did. But someone picked me up at that point, and they were asking me all about the trip, where I was going, this and that, and they were so amazed, and I was just thinking, oh, I was so excited about this trip. I was absolutely heartbroken, and it's not even happening now. And they were probably wondering why I was so sad or unmotivated about what I was planning to do. But I just thought, it was the thing is, I've been practicing this for weeks now. I'd been practicing getting into cars and telling people about this trip, and I didn't know what else to say. I couldn't tell them, oh, I was doing this, but now I failed and this and that. So I just carried on. I didn't know what else to do. So they picked me up, took me a bit further, and then someone else picked me up, and I started thinking, I don't have to go through China. I don't have to go to the other side of the world. I could go down all the way through Africa. I could go anywhere really, and but I just thought, it's over, really. So that night, set the tent up, the tarp, and I had a bottle of garlic sauce in my bag. I thought I'd treat myself. So I had the normal, at that point, what was normal, which was a pack of rice, and that was it. So I had a pack of rice, and I thought I'll treat myself to some flavours tonight. I'll put some garlic sauce in there, a bit of mayonnaise, garlic, that kind of thing. And as I got it out of my bag, I was thinking, this is the only thing holding me together right now. The only thing that's really going to save my mood at this point is just, I was so looking forward to this garlic rice because I was so hungry. I was just knackered. I just needed something to pick me up. And as I picked up the bottle of garlic, somehow the lid had become undone in my bag, and it was in there upside down because I was an idiot, and I picked it up and it just emptied itself all over the inside of my backpack, all over the sleeping bag, all over the tent, all over my clothes, everything. Some of it was in a dry bag, which was really good, but a lot of it got just stinky and garlicky, and that was just the final nail in the coffin, really. I thought, why try? Why even try? So, cleaned up what I could, put the tent up, ate my plain rice, and honestly, the next day, a big part of me just didn't want to wake up. It was that bad. So, didn't sleep at all well that night. Not at all. Obviously quite hungry. Enough water though, so 2 of the big 3 were not accounted for, and the next day was probably one of the worst days of my life. Not only had I thought I'd failed this big trip, I'd let myself down massively. It was also 2 of the 3 hadn't been satisfied, so that's really why my mood was so low. And I know that because the next day, or that evening, I got to Estonia. No, I didn't. I got to another camping spot, got some good food, got some good sleep, and lots of water, slept that night, and the next day everything seemed a bit more hopeful. Everything seemed more achievable, and if I didn't get to the other side of the world, that was okay. I could go to Africa, I could sort of swoop down a little bit, down through Europe, and then get to the bottom of Africa, and suddenly I didn't feel like a complete failure. I just felt like someone who had had some bad luck. And so I was reframing all of this as well. And that was only possible because my mood was back up again. And it just absolutely fascinated me. The difference in mood, in outlook, was essentially riding on had I had food, water and sleep. Now I remember last year I left a job at a crisis house, and I'd worked there for pretty much exactly 12 months. So I joined there in 2023, left in 2024, and you'd go there, well, basically if you don't know, a crisis house is where you go, you've had a mental breakdown, and you've gone to hospital, maybe A&E, because you are suicidal or you've gone psychotic or whatever. You're not safe to be in your own home. So you go to hospital, and before you go home, you're not quite ready, you're not quite built up again. Because you've had a breakdown, you don't have the emotional structure anymore. You've broken a bit, basically. And what you do is you go to a crisis house for 7 to 10 days, sometimes longer, but very rarely, to basically build yourself back up again. And so that's what I was doing as a job. And it was really, really rewarding, because I was just helping people who had broken mentally. And I've been there myself several times, particularly on this hitchhiking trip. And so I could really help people. And one of the things I saw every day was people stuck in a state of anxiety and or depression. And I'll ignore this one exception. The one exception is if you've got a biological mental health problem. So say you've got schizophrenia, it's a mental health condition. It's not something like anxiety, depression that you can work through, you know what I mean? So I'll ignore that for now, but most of the time, anxiety, depression, paranoia, OCD, all these things are apparent because they hadn't fulfilled the big 3. So they'd come talk to me once or twice a day. We'd do something called an intervention with everyone. Everyone got one twice a day. And then it was a house of 5 people. And they'd come to me and they'd say, I'm not feeling great today, this and that. We'd do a mood quiz or whatever. And it would turn out that they're feeling terrible. And so the first thing I'd ask them is, have you had enough water today? And the answer was always no. Of course it was always no. They'd say, I've had a lot of coffee though. And I'd say, I hated it because I sounded like I was talking to them like a kid, because it was such a basic thing, water. But they hadn't had any water. And I just thought, it's midday. How have you not had a glass of water yet? Of course you're going to feel terrible. You're going to feel anxious. Of course you are. Like, go and get a glass of water now. And so they would. And if they had water already, it was, have you eaten? have you had enough food? And they'd say, I haven't had breakfast. And again, this was midday, maybe it was the evening. And they might not have eaten all day. And I just said, well, of course you're going to feel anxious. Your body thinks there's not enough food in the environment. And so you've gone into a state of anxiety because you'd better be on the lookout because there's not enough food. And the third one, sleep. Sometimes they couldn't control the sleep, and that was not their fault. But sometimes they could. Sometimes they stayed up really, really late playing games. And that was something they could control. They could stop doing that. Being on your phone before bed, that's something you can stop that really, really impacts your sleep in a negative way. Sleeping in the daytime, all these things. And so one of the main things I was doing was helping people fulfill this big three, helping them get better sleep, making them aware that they're not drinking enough and eating enough. And the transformation I saw in people was incredible, really. If they went from not doing these three things to doing these three things, within about a day they were absolutely fine again, and they could all sometimes leave early. So it's really, really upsetting to me that we put such an emphasis on mental health being something that you just live with, something that you just struggle with, because you can do something about it. You can do three things about it, and it can be really, really simple, and it can actually make it so that you don't really have mental health problems anymore. I know there's exceptions to that, and I'm just ignoring those for the time being, but most people, I'd say 99% of people who came through the doors of the crisis house could do something about it. They could take control of their own mental health, do something about it, and actually be okay on the other side of it. Their mood would go from, say, a 2 out of 10 to a 6 or 7 out of 10. And once it gets to that point, you've regained control of yourself and your life and your goals. And then what my job became in the crisis house was, now that they've got the big three sorted, they can become more assertive so they can get more control over their lives. They can set goals for themselves. They can learn how to follow goals so they can live a more meaningful life. And it was really just a case of building up a person from the ground up again. So that's it. Thanks for listening. See you again next week.